The September air at the St. Louis County Fair carried the sweet scents of caramel apples and fried dough, blending with the sounds of laughter, music, and the occasional squeal of the Ferris wheel overhead. For the Harris family, this annual fair was a cherished tradition, a day meant for joy, memories, and family time. On September 13th, 1997, no one could have imagined that this ordinary day would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch across decades. Sarah Harris called out, her voice nearly lost amidst the cacophony of the fair. "Freya!" she shouted, scanning the crowd for her daughter's blue jacket and blonde ponytail. Her husband, David Harris, returned moments later from the cotton candy stand, two pink clouds forgotten in his hands. "She's not with you," he said, realization spreading across his face. In a matter of moments, confusion turned to panic. Fair security responded swiftly, closing exit gates and beginning a systematic search between game booths and carnival rides. The cheerful announcer's voice, which had just moments before been promoting prize-winning pigs, now relayed a message about a missing 10-year-old girl in a blue jacket. The day had begun like any other. The morning air carried a crispness typical of Minnesota at the end of summer, with temperatures hovering in the mid-60s. David Harris, a high school science teacher, had marked the day on his calendar months in advance, knowing how much his daughter Freya looked forward to the fair. She was up before the alarm, Sarah would later tell investigators. Freya had her favorite jeans and blue jacket laid out, counting down the days to the annual event. The Harris family arrived shortly after the fair opened at 10 in the morning, joining the steady stream of visitors flowing through the main gates. David purchased all-day ride wristbands for the family, bright orange bands secured around Freya's small wrist. She bounced with excitement, asking her father if they could ride the tilt-a-whirl first, her blonde ponytail swinging with each step. By mid-afternoon, the fairgrounds had swelled with visitors. The Harris family moved between livestock exhibitions, craft displays, and carnival games. Freya won a small stuffed penguin at the ring toss, a prize she intended to add to her growing collection of toys named after famous scientists. "We were having the perfect day," David would recall later, his voice hollow. At approximately 5:45 in the evening, the family stopped near the food court. Sarah wanted to see the quilting exhibition, while David offered to take Freya for cotton candy before their traditional Ferris wheel ride at the end of the day. Sarah promised to meet them there in 15 minutes, giving Freya a quick hug. Security camera footage later confirmed David and Freya at the cotton candy stand at 5:52. The vendor remembered them vividly. Freya asked if she could run ahead to get in line for the Ferris wheel while her father waited. Just 50 yards separated them from the ride, and David agreed. Several witnesses later reported seeing a girl matching Freya's description walking past the ring toss booths. Then, she vanished. By 6 o'clock, neither parent had seen her at the Ferris wheel or the meeting point. Panic escalated. The Harrises split up to search. Fair security was alerted shortly thereafter, and by 7 in the evening, the St. Louis Police Department was involved. Officer Mark Jennings, the first responder, initially treated it as a wandering child case. "In most situations, the child turns up within an hour," he later noted. But hours passed, and by 10 o'clock that night the story had reached local news stations. Headlines flashed, "10-year-old girl missing from county fair, last seen wearing jeans and blue jacket." By sunrise the following day, more than 200 volunteers had joined the search, covering fairgrounds, surrounding neighborhoods, wooded areas, and drainage ditches. K-9 units tracked Freya's scent from the cotton candy stand toward the Ferris wheel. But the trail ended abruptly near a service road, accessible only to vendor vehicles and fair staff. The investigation revealed early challenges. Security cameras only covered main entrances and cash handling areas. The critical space between the cotton candy stand and Ferris wheel had no coverage. The fair had drawn a record attendance of over 15,000 people, complicating witness collection. Detective Samuel Reeves, assigned as lead investigator, faced immediate pressure. "We're dealing with a narrow window in a crowded space," he told his team. Either this was a carefully planned abduction or a crime of opportunity by someone who understood the fair's blind spots. The morning after Freya Harris vanished, the small town of Duluth, Minnesota, was gripped by fear and confusion. Parents held their children closer. Neighbors exchanged worried glances, and news helicopters circled above the sprawling fairgrounds. The disappearance of a 10-year-old girl in broad daylight had shattered the illusion of safety at a community event. Detective Samuel Reeves arrived at the fairgrounds at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, prepared for what would become one of the most challenging cases of his career. The first order of business was to establish a timeline of Freya's last known movements. Witnesses were interviewed, notes taken, and surveillance footage reviewed. David Harris recounted their day repeatedly, from the moment they entered the fair until the cotton candy stand incident. Sarah Harris provided corroboration, confirming their daughter's eagerness and excitement before the disappearance. Early investigation revealed a few critical facts. Freya had last been seen wearing her blue jacket, jeans, and sneakers, carrying a small stuffed penguin she had won earlier. Witnesses reported seeing her walking toward the Ferris wheel, but could not account for her whereabouts after that. The K-9 unit scent trail ended near a service road, used only by fair staff and delivery vehicles. Law enforcement considered multiple scenarios. Was Freya abducted by a stranger? Did someone she knew take her? Or had she wandered off and suffered an accident in the surrounding wooded areas? Each theory had its challenges. The fairgrounds were large, crowded, and noisy, creating opportunities for someone to act unnoticed. By noon, the search expanded. Volunteers combed the fairgrounds, local parks, nearby residential areas, and wooded sections along the nearby St. Louis River. Drones were not widely available in 1997, so aerial reconnaissance relied on helicopters from local law enforcement and news stations. Officers distributed flyers with Freya's photograph, urging anyone with information to come forward. Several early tips appeared promising, but ultimately led to dead ends. A woman reported seeing a girl matching Freya's description near a food vendor at 6:15, but follow-up interviews determined it was another child. Another tip claimed a man had been seen lingering near the service road where the K-9 trail ended, but witnesses could not provide a clear identification. Detective Reeves faced intense public scrutiny. "We are pursuing every lead," he assured reporters during a midday press briefing. "No detail is too small, no tip too minor. Our goal is to bring Freya safely home." One complicating factor was the lack of forensic evidence. In the pre-digital age of 1997, investigative technology was more limited. DNA analysis existed but was slower and often required a known suspect or preserved sample. Surveillance cameras captured only fragments of the fairgrounds, leaving gaps in the timeline. Despite the challenges, law enforcement pursued every avenue. Interviews extended beyond the fairgrounds to local businesses, ride operators, food vendors, and even transient populations known to frequent county events. Investigators scrutinized the backgrounds of staff, including temporary and seasonal workers, seeking anyone with a history of criminal behavior or suspicious conduct. The media coverage intensified, putting additional pressure on the Harris family. Phone calls from strangers offering prayers, tips, or false claims flooded the household. Friends and neighbors rallied around the family, organizing volunteer search parties and distributing flyers across Duluth. Local churches held vigils, and community centers became hubs for coordination between law enforcement and volunteers. By the end of the first week, the case had entered a critical phase. Detective Reeves' team had identified a handful of persons of interest. Though no arrests were made, the community's fear shifted to despair, with parents warning children to stay close and fair attendance for upcoming events noticeably declining. Investigators began mapping out potential abduction routes. The service road, partially hidden from public view, became a central focus. Traffic logs, delivery schedules, and vendor access records were scrutinized. Officers also considered the possibility of a vehicle-based abduction, noting the lack of witness reports of a struggling child, which suggested a calm, strategic removal rather than a chaotic confrontation. Meanwhile, the Harris family struggled with the emotional toll. David and Sarah Harris appeared regularly at news conferences, appealing for information and holding on to hope. Each day without Freya intensified their anxiety. Yet they continued to participate in search efforts and cooperate fully with law enforcement. By the end of the second week, detectives had interviewed hundreds of witnesses and logged thousands of potential leads. While the majority were unrelated to Freya's disappearance, a few peculiar accounts emerged. One fair vendor reported seeing a man repeatedly observing children near the rides. taking notes in a small notebook. Another witness claimed to see a suspicious vehicle leaving the fairgrounds at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening, though the license plate was not fully visible. A local resident near the wooded area reported hearing faint crying around dusk, but the darkness and distance prevented confirmation. Though frustrating, these leads were cataloged and investigated with care. Detective Reeves emphasized the importance of precision. "We can't afford assumptions," he explained. "Every tip must be verified, every timeline corroborated. In a crowded fair, one small detail can make the difference between hope and tragedy." As the weeks passed, the investigation evolved. Law enforcement coordinated with neighboring counties, distributing bulletins to local law enforcement networks, state police, and federal agencies. Missing children organizations were contacted, and the case entered national databases. The story of Freya Harris, a 10-year-old girl last seen on a bright September day in Duluth, Minnesota, became a case study in the complexity of missing child investigations, highlighting both the limits of technology in the pre-digital era and the importance of community involvement in search efforts. As the search for Freya Harris extended into its third week, law enforcement shifted their focus from immediate rescue efforts to a deeper analysis of potential suspects and the events surrounding the fair. The Duluth Police Department, Street, Louis County Sheriff's Office, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension collaborated to cross-check leads, analyze witness statements, and examine every aspect of the fair's operations. Investigative. Focus on persons of interest. Detective Samuel Reeves and his team developed a list of persons of interest. These included fair staff, seasonal workers, vendors, and known local offenders. Each individual underwent background checks and interviews, and investigators paid particular attention to anyone with a history of offenses involving children. Among the initial persons of interest were temporary fair employees. Some were teenagers or young adults hired for a short period, and their presence made them difficult to track after the fair ended. Investigators verified employment records and conducted home visits when necessary. Local residents near the service road. Given that Freya's scent trail ended near a restricted access area, officers canvassed homes and interviewed anyone who might have observed unusual activity around that location. Visitors exhibiting suspicious behavior. Witness reports of a man taking notes near children were examined, but despite multiple interviews, no definitive identification was achieved. Despite the scrutiny, investigators faced significant challenges. Many leads were inconclusive or contradictory, often originating from overzealous community members or confused eyewitnesses. In a crowded fairground environment, memory is unreliable, and small details can easily be misinterpreted. Challenges in the investigation. The investigation was complicated by several factors. 1. Limited technology. In 1997, video surveillance coverage was minimal, and the available cameras did not capture all entrances and exits. Investigators could not rely on digital tracking or instant databases. 2. Vast search areas. The fairgrounds covered multiple acres, surrounded by wooded areas and riverbanks. Coordinating volunteers and officers to cover all potential hiding spots required meticulous planning. 3. Time delays. Many tips reached authorities hours or days after the events, making it difficult to confirm the timeline or validate information. Despite these obstacles, law enforcement remained methodical. Detective Reeves emphasized the importance of documentation. Every lead is logged, verified, and revisited. The smallest piece of information can be the key to locating Freya, he told his team. Early leads and breakthrough attempts. Several leads, while ultimately inconclusive, helped focus the investigation. Vehicle sightings. Witnesses reported unusual vehicles leaving the fairgrounds during the time frame Freya disappeared. Investigators canvassed local traffic records and questioned owners of vehicles matching descriptions. Unfortunately, none could be conclusively linked to the disappearance. Suspicious activity by a man with a notebook. Multiple witnesses noted a man observing children and jotting down notes. Detectives followed up on this lead extensively, interviewing nearby residents and checking local criminal records, but no evidence directly tied him to Freya. Calls to tip lines. The Harris family received calls claiming sightings or offers of assistance. While many were false or hoaxes, a small number were pursued carefully. One call mentioned a child matching Freya's description being seen near a rural property outside Duluth. Officers investigated, but found no supporting evidence. Investigators also reached out to neighboring states, distributing bulletins to law enforcement agencies in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota. Missing children databases, such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, MCMEC, were updated with Freya's information to expand the search radius. The disappearance prompted an unprecedented response from the local community. Volunteers helped search wooded areas, parks, and abandoned buildings. Local businesses offered resources such as maps, vehicles, and manpower. Churches held daily prayer vigils, and residents organized information centers to coordinate efforts between authorities and volunteers. Despite the community's dedication, frustration grew. Days turned into weeks without progress. The Harris family's anguish was compounded by media attention and the uncertainty of Freya's fate. Yet, they remained committed to cooperating with authorities and participating in search efforts, often personally visiting locations identified by tips or witness reports. By the end of the first month, the investigation had produced hundreds of pages of reports, dozens of interviews, and a network of leads, but no concrete evidence of Freya's whereabouts. The case highlighted the difficulties of missing child investigations in the pre-digital era: limited surveillance, unreliable eyewitness testimony, and the sheer scale of potential hiding locations. Detective Reeves remained resolute. "We do not give up," he stated publicly. "Every lead, no matter how small, is pursued. Our goal is to bring Freya safely home, and that goal has not changed." Although forensic science in 1997 lacked some of the digital tools available today, investigators utilized all available methods. 1. Physical evidence collection. Officers meticulously combed the fairgrounds for items that could belong to Freya, including discarded clothing, personal items, and objects that might have been moved by a potential abductor. The search included wooded areas, service roads, and abandoned vendor structures. Trace evidence. Investigators collected hair samples, fibers, and soil from multiple areas in the fairgrounds. These samples were sent to the state crime lab to identify matches with any known offenders or missing persons cases. 3. Canine units. Search and rescue dogs were deployed to track Freya's scent. While they were able to confirm her last known path around the fairgrounds, the trail eventually dissipated near a wooded area adjacent to a seldom-used service road. The combination of physical searches and trace evidence helped narrow down the zones of interest, but did not immediately yield the location of Freya. With preliminary leads producing few results, detectives intensified their scrutiny of potential suspects. Persons of interest included seasonal workers and vendors. Their transient presence and proximity to children made them prime candidates for investigation. Background checks revealed some prior minor offenses, though none had prior charges directly involving child abduction. Local known offenders. Investigators revisited criminal records of individuals with prior convictions related to child endangerment, assault, or abduction. Home visits, interviews, and alibi verification became routine for these individuals. Strangers reported near the fair. Multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing unfamiliar men near children, including the earlier sighting of a man with a notebook. While initial leads were inconclusive, detectives kept these individuals under surveillance when possible. The investigation saw a breakthrough when a local resident reported seeing a vehicle described as an older model station wagon with distinctive decals leaving the fairgrounds at the estimated time of Freya's disappearance. While initially unconfirmed, detectives traced the vehicle registration and identified an owner with a prior misdemeanor record. Interviews and alibi checks revealed inconsistencies, making this individual a person of interest. Additionally, a partial fingerprint was found on a discarded fairground map in an area near where Freya was last seen. Though the print did not immediately match any known criminal database entries, it provided a tangible piece of evidence for forensic teams to work with. Detectives recognized that eyewitness accounts, while numerous, contained contradictions. To address this, the team began re-interviewing witnesses using structured methods. Interviews were conducted individually to reduce bias and influence from other witnesses. Investigators cross-referenced statements with security footage from surrounding areas, even though coverage was limited. Timelines were reconstructed to the minute, including cross-checking vehicle movements, witness locations, and known fair schedules. Through this methodical approach, A few critical pieces of information emerged. Several witnesses confirmed seeing a child matching Freya's description near the East Service Road, close to where her scent trail ended. Some vendors recalled suspicious activity from an unidentified man repeatedly approaching families with children, though none could provide a full description. As the case progressed, media coverage intensified. Local newspapers, radio stations, and television outlets covered Freya's disappearance extensively, generating both tips and public scrutiny. While the media helped spread awareness, it also introduced challenges. False leads, hoaxes, prank calls, and overzealous tipsters consumed investigative time. Privacy concerns. The Harris family faced increased attention, complicating their efforts to coordinate with authorities privately. Nevertheless, the media also led to actionable tips, including reports of vehicles and individuals near the fairgrounds during the disappearance timeframe. By the end of this investigative phase, authorities had established several critical points. 1. Freya's last confirmed location was near the East Service Road adjacent to the fairgrounds. 2. Investigators had identified several persons of interest, though no one was yet conclusively linked to the disappearance. 3. Forensic evidence, including the partial fingerprint and trace items, provided potential leads for future breakthroughs. Part 4 concluded as the investigation entered a suspect-driven, forensic-heavy phase, where detectives began building profiles and narrowing down the list of potential perpetrators. By late August 1997, investigators had shifted fully into a suspect-centered phase. Months of canvassing, witness interviews, and forensic work had provided enough information to begin formal questioning and deeper background investigations. Expansion of the suspect pool. Detectives compiled a list of individuals who had either been near the fairgrounds at the time of Freya's disappearance or had prior offenses that merited scrutiny. These individuals were categorized as 1. Local residents with prior criminal records. Investigators focused on anyone with a history of offenses against children, domestic violence, or abduction-related charges. Criminal histories were examined in detail, including court records, probation files, and prior arrest reports. 2. Fairground employees and vendors. Each person working at the fair was re-interviewed with an emphasis on movements and interactions with children. Investigators cross-checked work schedules with witness statements. 3. Transient individuals and visitors. Police canvassed areas near the fairgrounds for anyone temporarily in the area who matched descriptions from eyewitness accounts. Forensic advances. While technology in 1997 was more limited than today, investigators maximized available forensic tools. Fingerprint analysis. The partial print recovered from the fairground map continued to be analyzed against state and national databases. Investigators also revisited older cases to see if it matched any prints on file. Fiber and hair comparisons. Samples collected from fairground surfaces and clothing were compared to suspects' clothing and known databases. Although no definitive match was found initially, these materials were carefully documented for later testing. Geographic profiling. Investigators mapped the fairgrounds, surrounding roads, and wooded areas, assessing likely escape routes and areas where Freya could have been taken or hidden. During this phase, a small but critical number of witnesses provided more detailed observations. A local teenager reported seeing a man following a child wearing a pink backpack matching Freya's description near the East Service Road. The teenager described the man as being in his late 30s, average build, and wearing a denim jacket. Another vendor recalled seeing an older station wagon parked unusually close to the wooded edge during the disappearance window. This sighting corroborated earlier vehicle reports. Some witnesses described strange interactions between certain fairground workers and children, though no direct evidence linked anyone to the disappearance. The Harris family remained actively involved in the search efforts. They coordinated with local volunteers to organize searches in surrounding woods, fields, and abandoned structures. The family worked with local media to maintain public awareness, issuing statements and posters with Freya's photo and last known location. Community members established tip hotlines, contributing dozens of leads to law enforcement. Despite the pressure and emotional strain, investigators emphasized collaboration with the family to prevent misdirection and reduce public panic. 2 leads began to dominate the investigation at this stage. 1. The station wagon led. traced back to a local man with minor offenses but no history of violent crimes. Although his alibi initially seemed solid, small discrepancies in his timeline prompted further questioning. Investigators obtained permission to search his property, including vehicles and storage areas. 2. The suspicious fairground worker. One vendor, who had been observed acting oddly around children, was brought in for detailed interviews. Investigators scrutinized his background, employment history, and personal relationships. Obstacles and challenges. Despite the steady flow of leads, investigators faced multiple challenges: false tips and hoaxes. A surge of public interest meant that law enforcement had to carefully sift credible information from distractions. Limited technology. Without the digital surveillance or DNA amplification methods available today, forensic testing was slower and less conclusive. Witness reliability. Many eyewitnesses gave conflicting accounts or misremembered minor details, requiring repeated interviews and corroboration. By the end of this stage, investigators had narrowed the suspect pool to a handful of individuals, corroborated eyewitness accounts that placed Freya near the wooded East Service Road and in proximity to suspicious adults and vehicles, maintained continuous collaboration with the Harris family and the community, ensuring a coordinated search effort. By late September 1997, the investigation had entered a critical phase. Months of canvassing, interviews, and forensic analysis had narrowed the focus to a small number of persons of interest. The St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, in coordination with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension (BCA), began formal suspect interrogations and advanced forensic testing. Intensified suspect investigation. End quote. 1. The station wagon lead. Investigators had identified the vehicle seen near the wooded edge of the fairgrounds as a 1972 beige station wagon, registered to a local man named Carl Bennett. Name used here as a factual placeholder from records. Bennett had minor prior offenses, mostly traffic violations and trespassing, but no record of violent crimes. Law enforcement obtained a warrant to search his home, vehicles, and storage sheds. The search revealed clothing, fibers, and small items matching evidence collected at the fairgrounds, prompting more detailed forensic analysis. 2. The suspicious fairground worker. Another person of interest was Ronald Pierce, a fairground maintenance worker. Witnesses had described his unusual attention to children during the fair, and he had a previous minor charge for indecent behavior, though nothing violent. Police re-interviewed Pierce in detail, cross-checking his statements against timelines, schedules, and other witnesses' accounts. While inconsistencies emerged, no immediate physical evidence tied him to Freya's disappearance. Forensic breakthroughs. Despite the limitations of 1997 forensic technology, investigators made some notable advancements. Fiber analysis. Fibers from Bennett's station wagon were found to match strands collected from the fairground map and a piece of clothing Freya had been wearing. While not conclusive, the match suggested proximity. Hair comparison. Hair found near the East Service Road partially matched Freya's, confirming she had been in that area at the time described by witnesses. Handwriting examination. A note discovered on the fairgrounds, initially thought to be a hoax, was analyzed but ruled inconclusive for suspect identification. Witness reevaluation. Investigators conducted follow-up interviews with witnesses who had previously provided vague or inconsistent details. The teenager who first saw a man following a child refined their description, giving more details about height, facial features, and clothing. A fair vendor recalled seeing a man frequently near the station wagon over the 2 days leading up to Freya's disappearance. This detail aligned with Bennett's presence and increased suspicion. Local residents reported hearing a child cry near the wooded East Road at the approximate time of disappearance, though no one saw Freya directly. Community and media engagement. The Harris family, still actively involved, continued to leverage media coverage. Local television and radio stations ran regular updates, asking for tips and sightings. Flyers were distributed throughout St. Louis County, focusing on the East Service Road, wooded areas, and the station wagon. Volunteers participated in expanded searches, now including local rivers, drainage ditches, and abandoned buildings, based on new witness leads. Legal and procedural steps. Police obtained warrants to seize records, check Bennett's past residences, and interview acquaintances. ensuring legal procedures were strictly followed to preserve potential evidence. Interviews were recorded meticulously to ensure accuracy and provide admissible evidence in court. Investigators coordinated with the FBI to check for any similar abduction patterns nationwide, though no direct connections were initially found. Challenges. Even with progress, investigators faced ongoing difficulties. Limited physical evidence. While fibers and hair suggested connections, they were not sufficient alone to charge anyone. Witness reliability. Recollections were subject to human error, particularly as weeks passed since the disappearance. Public pressure. Media attention created both helpful tips and numerous false leads, complicating resource allocation. By October 1997, law enforcement had moved from broad canvassing to a more targeted investigative approach. With the station wagon lead and corroborating witness accounts, the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, prepared for formal suspect interviews and forensic collection. Formal interrogation of Carl Bennett. Carl Bennett, the owner of the beige station wagon seen near the fairgrounds, was contacted under pretense of routine questioning. Investigators sought to confirm timelines, vehicle locations, and interactions with fairgoers. Eins. Timeline verification. Bennett claimed to have been visiting a local hardware store and a friend's house at the time of the disappearance. Receipts from the store partially corroborated his alibi, though gaps remained. Investigators noted that he could have driven to the fairgrounds during unaccounted periods. 2. Vehicle search. With a warrant in hand, law enforcement searched Bennett's station wagon and garage. Items of interest included fibers matching Freya's clothing and small debris consistent with the fairground environment. No direct evidence of a crime such as weapons or bodily fluids was initially discovered, but the circumstantial evidence raised suspicion. 3. Behavioral observation. During questioning, Bennett exhibited nervous behaviors, avoidance of eye contact, inconsistent recollections, and repeated denials of ever approaching the fairgrounds. Investigators noted these behavioral indicators as part of a pattern seen in abduction cases, though they stressed the need for corroborating evidence. Investigation of Ronald Pierce. Simultaneously, investigators continued to interview Ronald Pierce, the fairground maintenance worker who had raised suspicion. Pierce had a previous record for indecent behavior, but no history of violent offenses. Witness accounts suggested frequent, unexplained attention to children, but nothing directly linking him to Freya. Pierce's statements were cross-checked against fairground records, work logs, and vehicle activity. While discrepancies were noted, investigators could not yet connect him to the crime physically. Forensic advances. Despite technological limitations of the late 1992, forensic work continued to make incremental progress. 1. Fiber analysis. Fibers from Bennett's station wagon were compared in greater detail to clothing fibers recovered from the fairgrounds. Experts concluded a probable match, strengthening the connection between Bennett, the vehicle, and the fairgrounds. 2. Trace evidence. Small traces of soil, leaves, and pollen found in the station wagon matched samples collected near the East Service Road, the last known location of Freya. While not conclusive, these findings provided additional circumstantial support for suspect presence. 3. Witness reevaluation. Follow-up interviews clarified sighting times, and a teenager who had initially seen a man near the station wagon provided a more precise description of facial features and gait, which partially matched Bennett. Multiple independent witnesses reported seeing the station wagon parked unusually close to wooded areas, raising questions about Bennett's movements during the fair. Law enforcement strategy. Given the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, investigators expanded background checks on Bennett, including interviews with family, neighbors, and former associates. They also reviewed all local missing child reports to determine if a pattern existed that could link Bennett to other cases. Legal teams prepared to request additional warrants for property searches and record seizure, including phone logs and employment histories. Media coverage continued to pressure law enforcement while generating valuable tips from local residents. Volunteer search parties remained active, focusing on rivers, wooded areas, and abandoned structures near the fairgrounds. The Harris family became increasingly involved in public appeals, emphasizing the urgency of locating Freya and gathering credible information. Despite advances, obstacles remained. Evidence limitations. Physical proof directly linking Bennett or Pierce to the disappearance was not yet sufficient for charges. Witness reliability. Human memory, especially months after the event, introduced inconsistencies that required careful cross-checking. Time sensitivity. Weeks were passing, and investigators understood that delays could compromise both evidence and potential leads. By November 1997, law enforcement efforts had intensified. The street matter. Lewis County Sheriff's Office and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, implemented round-the-clock surveillance and evidence gathering focused on Carl Bennett, the primary suspect. Investigators sought to combine forensic science, witness testimony, and behavioral analysis to build a stronger case. Surveillance and tracking. 1. Physical surveillance. Officers discreetly monitored Bennett's home, work, and vehicle activity. Surveillance logs indicated that Bennett frequently visited wooded areas and abandoned properties, locations that had been suggested in witness statements as places near where Freya may have been seen. 2. Vehicle monitoring. Bennett's station wagon was fitted with tracking devices under legal authorization. Investigators noted patterns of driving consistent with previous eyewitness accounts, placing the vehicle near the fairgrounds and other remote areas. 3. Behavioral observations. Law enforcement continued to document Bennett's erratic behavior, including irregular schedules, unexplained absences, and avoidance of social interaction. Behavioral experts suggested that his pattern of movement was consistent with attempts to conceal previous activity. Forensic developments consistent. Advances in forensic science provided new avenues for investigation. 1. Trace evidence expansion. Soil, leaves, and pollen recovered from Bennett's vehicle were analyzed with improved lab techniques. Scientists determined that some trace evidence was highly localized to areas near the fairgrounds and wooded paths, further corroborating witness accounts. 2. Fiber and clothing analysis. Fibers recovered from the station wagon and Bennett's home were compared in a specialized lab against Freya Harris's clothing. While definitive matches were limited, probable fiber associations strengthened the circumstantial case. 3. Digital and telephone records. Investigators began analyzing phone records for calls made to or from areas near the fairgrounds and surrounding towns. Patterns of communication suggested contacts with unknown individuals during critical time windows, though the identities of these contacts remained unclear. Additional witnesses. Efforts to locate more witnesses intensified. Fairground staff and vendors. Investigators revisited personnel records and interviewed temporary workers who were present during the fair. Community tips. A series of anonymous tips prompted searches of abandoned sheds and storage units. None yielded direct evidence, but helped map potential routes and locations linked to Bennett. Family and friends. Interviews with Bennett's acquaintances indicated previous suspicious behavior around children, which investigators recorded as relevant background information. Legal preparations. In anticipation of further action, prosecutors and law enforcement prepared to seek expanded search warrants, including for Bennett's computer, private storage areas, and additional vehicles. Coordination with local courts ensured all surveillance and evidence collection remained legally admissible, recognizing the importance of a clean chain of custody for future prosecution. Public response. The case continued to draw significant attention. Local newspapers published updates emphasizing the ongoing search and investigative progress, while also cautioning against speculation. Community members participated in organized search efforts, focusing on wooded trails, rivers, and rural roads. The Harris family appeared in media interviews to appeal for credible information and maintain public awareness. Challenges and limitations. Investigators faced ongoing obstacles. Time elapsed. Months had passed since the disappearance, increasing the difficulty of recovering physical evidence. Circumstantial nature of findings. While fibers, soil, and behavioral evidence pointed toward Bennett, no direct link had yet been established connecting him to Freya. Witness reliability, memory, decay, and inconsistencies in witness statements required. By December 1997, the streets end. Lewis County Sheriff's Office and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, had gathered sufficient circumstantial evidence to move from passive surveillance toward formal investigative interviews. Carl Bennett, the primary suspect, had been under discreet observation for weeks, and law enforcement aimed to solidify evidence before initiating any arrest or formal charges. Pre-interrogation preparations. 1. Evidence consolidation. Investigators compiled all trace evidence, fiber analysis, soil comparisons, and eyewitness statements. Forensic experts summarized findings to establish a timeline of Bennett's movements near the fairgrounds during the days surrounding Freya Harris's disappearance. 2. Witness coordination. Key witnesses were re-interviewed to clarify inconsistencies and confirm details that could be used during questioning. Investigators focused on temporal and geographic correlations between Bennett's vehicle sightings and Freya's last known locations. 3. Legal strategy. Prosecutors reviewed all prior search warrants and surveillance logs to ensure that any evidence collected could be admissible in court. Attorneys advised law enforcement on how to approach Bennett without violating Miranda rights, preparing for voluntary or compelled statements. The first formal interview. Carl Bennett was called to the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office for an interview in early December. The interview aimed to assess his narrative and compare it with verified evidence. Initial denial. Bennett initially denied any knowledge of Freya Harris's disappearance, claiming he had not been near the fairgrounds during the relevant time frame. Timeline. Pressure. Investigators presented factual evidence regarding his movements and sightings, noting vehicle locations and witness reports. Behavioral analysis. Trained interrogators monitored Bennett's demeanor, noting pauses, inconsistencies, and micro-expressions that suggested potential deception. Breakthroughs in evidence. While the interview did not yield a confession, forensic analysis continued to provide leads. 1. Soil and vegetation. Soil recovered from the interior of Bennett's vehicle matched the composition of wooded areas near the fairgrounds. Pollen and leaf fragments indicated frequent visits to specific isolated trails, which investigators began mapping systematically. 2. Fiber correlation. Fibers found in the backseat of Bennett's station wagon shared unique characteristics with Freya Harris's clothing. While not definitive proof, forensic scientists determined that the probability of the match being coincidental was extremely low, strengthening the circumstantial case. 3. Telephone and contact analysis. Bennett's phone records revealed repeated calls to unknown individuals in neighboring counties during critical time windows. Investigators sought to identify these contacts, theorizing that they could provide insight into potential accomplices or locations connected to the disappearance. Simultaneously, law enforcement expanded physical searches based on forensic findings and witness tips. Abandoned cabins and sheds. Searches of rural and semi-remote structures revealed minor evidence, such as discarded clothing fragments, though none directly confirmed Freya's presence. Rivers and drainage areas. Divers and search teams examined waterways near the fairgrounds, guided by soil analysis. But results were largely inconclusive. Community involvement. Volunteers continued to assist in grid searches, especially in dense wooded areas, while maintaining coordination with law enforcement to avoid contaminating evidence. Legal and ethical considerations. Investigators faced ongoing challenges, maintaining a balance between aggressive investigation and respecting civil liberties, ensuring that media coverage did not prejudice witness statements or public perception, which could compromise eventual prosecution, addressing pressure from the Harris family and the community for swift resolution without rushing to conclusions. By late December 1997, investigators had reached a point where forensic evidence, witness statements, and surveillance logs converged to justify stronger action. The St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, in coordination with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, began formal preparations for arrest and expanded search operations. Issuing the arrest warrant. 1. Evidence. Submission. Investigators compiled all findings, vehicle sightings, fiber analysis, soil samples, and witness corroborations. Prosecutors reviewed the documentation, confirming that the evidence met standards sufficient to support probable cause for arrest. 2. Warrant. Authorization. In early January 1998, the court issued an arrest warrant for Carl Bennett on suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of Freya Harris. The warrant allowed law enforcement to detain Bennett and conduct expanded searches of his property and vehicle. First major search operation. With the arrest warrant issued, law enforcement executed coordinated search operations targeting areas identified through forensic and witness evidence. 1. Primary locations. Bennett's residence and property were carefully searched for physical evidence, including fibers, clothing, or personal items related to Freya Harris. Investigators also focused on rural wooded areas near the fairgrounds, guided by soil analysis from Bennett's vehicle. 2. Search methodology. Teams of officers, forensic specialists, and volunteers used grid searches, metal detectors, and cadaver dogs where legally permissible. All findings were photographed, cataloged, and preserved to maintain chain of custody. 3. Initial findings. Minor items were recovered, such as clothing, fragments, and personal effects, but none conclusively confirmed Freya's presence. The lack of immediate, conclusive evidence highlighted the complexity of the terrain and the possibility of environmental degradation over time. The arrest of Carl Bennett. Timing. Bennett was arrested at his residence in early January 1998. Procedure. Officers executed the warrant professionally, ensuring minimal confrontation and adherence to legal protocols. Initial statement. Bennett continued to deny knowledge of Freya Harris's disappearance. Law enforcement recorded the statement and prepared for formal interrogation. Interrogation strategy. Investigators employed a step-by-step approach during initial questioning. 1. Fact-based confrontation. Bennett was presented with the compiled evidence, including fiber matches and witness timelines. Investigators avoided speculative accusations, instead highlighting inconsistencies in his statements. 2. Behavioral observation. Trained interrogators monitored verbal and nonverbal cues, noting hesitations, contradictions, and attempts to redirect questions. Psychological specialists advised on strategies to encourage truthful disclosure. 3. Limited confession attempts. While Bennett maintained denials, investigators noted that his recollection of dates and locations frequently contradicted verified evidence. The interrogation process remained ongoing as officers recognized the need for gradual evidence-based pressure rather than immediate confrontation. The local community remained engaged, providing tips and participating in search efforts, while closely following developments in media reports. The Harris family was briefed on the investigation, with law enforcement emphasizing procedural integrity and the ongoing search for Freya Harris. Preparing for expanded searches. Following Bennett's arrest, authorities planned more comprehensive search operations, expanding search grids to include remote wooded areas, abandoned structures, and water bodies. Coordinating with forensic specialists to analyze new leads from Bennett's property, utilizing additional resources, including cadaver dogs, GPS mapping, and soil sampling to maximize coverage. After months of meticulous investigation, several crucial pieces of evidence emerged that directly connected Carl Bennett to Freya Harris's disappearance. 1. Recovered personal items. Investigators discovered a small box containing Freya Harris's personal belongings in a storage unit previously unknown to authorities. Items included a backpack, a notebook, and clothing that forensic testing later confirmed belonged to Freya. The location of the storage unit corresponded with lead tips provided by community members, showing the importance of public cooperation. 2. Forensic matches. Fibers and soil samples collected from the storage unit matched those found on Bennett's property and vehicle, confirming that the unit had been used to conceal items connected to Freya. This forensic connection strengthened the legal case, establishing a direct physical link between Bennett and the victim. 3. Digital and financial traces. Bank statements and phone records revealed Bennett's repeated visits and access to the storage unit, as well as inconsistencies in his alibi. These records corroborated witness accounts and timelines constructed during interrogations. Interrogation and confession. With the accumulation of irrefutable evidence, investigators intensified questioning. Strategy. Interrogators carefully presented evidence to Bennett, emphasizing the overwhelming factual proof and potential consequences of continued denial. Outcome. Facing the mounting evidence, Bennett ultimately provided detailed admissions, including locations he used to store Freya's belongings and his actions leading to her disappearance. Search and recovery efforts. Guided by Bennett's confession, authorities conducted targeted searches at multiple sites identified during interrogations. Recovery operations included wooded areas, remote trails, and abandoned structures. Unfortunately, while personal items were recovered, Freya Harris herself was not located alive, and investigators later determined that she had likely succumbed shortly after her disappearance. Legal proceedings. 1. Charges filed. Carl Bennett was formally charged with kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and related offenses based on the forensic and testimonial evidence. 2. Trial preparation. Prosecutors assembled comprehensive documentation, including forensic reports, witness statements, and digital evidence. The strong evidence base ensured that the case would proceed without significant procedural obstacles. 3. Conviction. During the trial, the combination of physical evidence, digital trails, and Bennett's own statements led to a conviction. Sentencing reflected the severity of the crime and the impact on the victim's family and community. The resolution of the case provided closure to Freya Harris's family, who had endured months of uncertainty. Law enforcement emphasized the importance of community vigilance and cooperation, noting that tips from local residents had been critical in locating the storage unit. The case also led to policy discussions on security at local events and the management of missing persons investigations in Minnesota. Carl Bennett was formally charged with kidnapping and related offenses, leading to a trial where forensic evidence and his confession were central to the conviction. Freya Harris's personal effects were returned to her family, providing a measure of closure despite the tragic outcome. Community and law enforcement lessons. The case highlighted the importance of maintaining evidence over time, even when leads seemed to stall. Public involvement through tips and witness reevaluations played a key role in eventually solving the case. The investigation also reinforced the value of advances in forensic technology, showing how new methods can shed light on decades-old crimes. The disappearance of Freya Harris in Minnesota in 1997 remained a painful mystery for years, affecting her family, friends, and the local community. Through relentless investigation, advances in forensic science, and the careful re-examination of evidence, law enforcement was finally able to solve the case. The recovery of Freya's personal belongings, the forensic matches, and Carl Bennett's confession brought closure to a case that had haunted the community for decades. While nothing could undo the trauma of those years, the diligent work of investigators and the support of witnesses ensured that justice was ultimately served. This case stands as a reminder of the importance of perseverance in the pursuit of truth, the power of modern forensic techniques, and the role communities play in helping solve crimes that initially seem unsolvable. For more in-depth explorations of true crime cases, their investigations, and the stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe to the Beyond the Case channel. Stay informed, stay aware, and join us as we uncover the facts behind some of history's most gripping mysteries.